Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another round Basis Picks. As always, please like and subscribe, share with a friend, a colleague, a relative, an associate, an enemy, any and all in between. It is appreciated. I do have to apologize, there hasn't been much going on this week, but it has been a very long week. I almost wasn't gonna bother with this particular weekend, but there are some interesting fights on, some decent scraps, so it was only right, you know, get out the camera. Hopefully the microphone is working. I still need to get a new one. I'm waiting on that to be ordered, and yeah, we'll kind of see where we go to. There's only a couple of fights on the Queensberry card I want to talk about, and then a couple of fights on the Top Rank card, so we'll do it in segments as we usually do. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into the picks. Alright, so if we look at the Queensberry card taking place at York Hall, it is headlined by Denzel Bentley versus Derevyanchenko, and on the undercard there's actually two fighters that I'm not interested in the fights they're in, but there's two fighters that I do quite like watching. So you have obviously Alois Jr. That's not particularly one I'm referring to, but there's Ben Fell. He's on there against Omar Rodriguez. I don't know much about Omar, so I can just kind of look at that fight with a, I guess, yeah, just with a blank slate as such. But Joshua Frankham is also on the card. Now, if you've been on the channel for any period of time, you will know that Joshua Frankham versus George Davey was one of my fights of the year live last year. It was one of my best fights to watch. I was there in attendance and it was riveting from start to finish. Frankham, I believe at the time, was 8-0 and George Davey was 8-0-1, I believe at the time. So yeah, it was a really good scrap. So I was interested when I saw Joshua Frankham on the card, but he's fighting a 4-9 journeyman by the name of Artyom Splar or some name like that. So yeah, I don't expect it to be a difficult fight if, you know, Frankham has still got anything about him, but I just thought I would mention those two. Let's look at, so you've got Alois Jr. against Alonzo Berardi, both Queensberry guys. Alois is 7-1 with, I think it's 6 KOs, 7 KOs, and then I know Berardi is 8-0 with 6 KOs. So yeah, look, very interesting between the two. They had a pretty good back and forth on the press conference. I mean, look, Alois is he's a powerhouse. He basically loads up. I'm not gonna say he loads up a lot, but he loads pretty much his entire body weight into most of his power shots. He hasn't really had to go past, I think, what, the 4th round as a pro. Maybe the sort of the 4th. I can't remember him going past the 4th round. So at sort of that, you know, level and that pace, you know, he's really stepping on the gas. This one I do think is going to go a little bit longer, so it will be interesting to see how he you know, sort of how his engine and his energy maintains going through the rest of the rounds. But Berardi is no slouch. Berardi is also a heavy hitter, very similar to Alois, but the difference is he doesn't really load up on shots as much. He more kind of lets the shots flow, finds his openings, pokes holes in the weakness of his opponent, and then manages to sort of take them out once they're suitably worn down. So he's not trying to usually win fights with one shot. He's usually trying to get a you know, sort of get a nice sustained beat down on his opponent. Neither guy has fought the best of the best competition, if we're going to be honest, in terms of, you know, their levels. So they probably will be each other's best pro opponent. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that. And I think, based on sort of how I've seen both guys previously, I think Berardi's going to have success in the first 2 rounds, maybe, while Alois Jr. is kind of getting a bit, almost trying to sort of loosen up and feel his way into the fight. but I can see holes in Berardi where when sometimes he throws, he will tend to either drop his backhand defensively, or he may sometimes when he's shooting, especially when he's shooting the setup jab, he can sort of tip his head up a little bit, leaving the chin exposed. And with someone like Alois Jr., with the speed that he's got and that explosive power, I can't see a situation where he doesn't get caught in one of those moments and he's get buzzed, and clearly I would assume he would get hurt from that. So kind of with that in mind, I'm going to go with Alois Jr. to win this fight via stoppage in the round. I think it's going to be later. I think it's going to be sort of about round 6. So that's kind of where I'm leaning to, round 6 in this fight. I mean, potentially, maybe, let's say between 6 to 8, but I think round 6, round 7 is more the range. Look, let's look at Denzel Bentley versus Derek Osazi. Now look, Osazi is a very, very smooth, clean operator. He's promoted by Nova Sports, I believe. He's one of Napa's managed fighters. Good record. Ultimately, he's 13-1. The only loss he's had was to Tyler Denny, and in that fight he went from literally fighting 4 rounders in his fights previous to, I think it was a 10 rounder or a 12 rounder straight away. Obviously Tyler Denny too experienced at that point. That was the only loss he took. Outside of that though, he's had some decent level wins on his record. He's a good operator. He's got good footwork. He's got a decent punch selection. He's quite smooth. He kind of knows how to point score. He's not blessed with power, which I think is going to be a slight issue here. Now, power's not the be all and end all. We saw with Nathan Heaney when he faced Denzel Bentley, he didn't necessarily have power, but he was able to box and move and sort of keep Denzel having to sort of just look for 1 or 2 big shots. Whereas Osazi, I think, because he knows Denzel, they've sparred before. They're quite good friends, if you want to call it that, outside of the ring, you know, for as much as I guess you can be friends in boxing. But yeah, they're cool with each other, cordial, so they will kind of know how each other operates. In that, I can see that Osazi is he's taken this fight because he's comfortable with Denzel. He's comfortable with the speed, he's comfortable with the angles, he's comfortable with, I guess, the way that the punches are going to be thrown and the trajectory. Denzel's obviously got a lot riding on this particular fight, not because it's a big fight, but he can't afford any more slip-ups. He is, I think, 19-3-1 at this point. Now, one of his losses has come at world level, so that's nothing major. The other 2, obviously, Felix Cash and then Nathan Heaney. He's obviously had to rebuild after those, but he's a very dangerous operator himself. He's not necessarily like a typical boxer. Like he can box, he can get on the inside, but everything he throws off the jab hand is always kind of trying to set up something big coming from the right. He's never really looking to just sort of box to a decision. And I think in this fight, he's not going to be looking for one big load up shot against Osazi, and I think that may ultimately play into Osazi's hands, especially in the first few rounds. But I do think when the power does start to land, and sort of land consistently round after round, from probably, I would say, round 3 to 4 onwards, I can see opportunity there where Osazi is sort of having to like back up. He's having to sort of move around to try and stay away from the power, trying to win from the outside, but probably not doing enough. So my ultimate prediction, I do think it's going to go the distance. Osazi doesn't have the stopping power to really worry Denzel Bentley, so Bentley may end up taking more shots than he should in this fight. But I do think when Osazi starts feeling his power in the ring, he's gonna for lack of a better way, he's going to start to retreat, try to box smart, try to box safe, but ultimately kind of lose rounds based on that. So my prediction is for Denzel Bentley to win the fight via a unanimous decision. And yeah, but it will be a pretty spirited effort from Osazi. Now, with that being said, let's move over to the top rank card. Okay, so on this card, there's actually some decent, younger fighters. Obviously, everyone knows I have a little bit of a soft spot for Jai Tucker, even though he hasn't really been doing what he needs to be doing as of late. But Abdullah Mason's on the card. I'm not going to really predict those fights because I expect him to get the job done as he does. I think he's still within his building process at the moment. 3 fights to look at though. The first one, Arslanbek Makhmudov against Guido Vianello. Now, Arslanbek has been back since his loss to Ajit Caballero back in December. He did rebound off of that with a stoppage win. I think it was about 2 months ago now, if I remember correctly. Now, Guido Vianello is not a very good heavyweight in my opinion, but what Guido does have is movement. And Arslanbek, look, if you're a person that either stands in front of him or is trying to have a physical fight in range, you're fish food. Like, that's his bread and butter. But his body mechanics, the way he moves, everything is it's a bit clunky, it's a bit cumbersome. He's very dangerous, very, very heavy-handed, but he's got to get to the target. Now, one thing Guido Vianello does have is speed and movement, especially for being a 6'6", 6'7" guy. He hits fairly hard himself, not to the level of Makhmudov, but enough that I guess if he touches you, you're gonna pay him some respect in that sense. I'm gonna be bold here. Again, I don't think that Guido Vianello is very good at all. I think he's a below average heavyweight, if I'm honest. But Arslanbek's deficiencies were badly exposed back in December. And even though they was kind of exposed, I guess, from the Carlos Takam fight, you thought, oh, well, the power is just gonna basically be his get out of jail free card. Well, Caballero did the same thing. Then his opponent, the last opponent, whose name I don't remember off the top of my head, but I remember he employed a bit of movement in those first couple of rounds, and Makhmudov was having some problems with that. Guido Vianello, I believe, is going to do the same thing, probably do it a bit better and skirt around the outsides. Now, it is in Quebec, so you would expect that Makhmudov will get consideration from the judges for trying to come forward and trying to force the action, but I'm going to be bold here. I'm going for the upset. I think that Guido Vianello is going to get a points decision, maybe a split decision, controlling the pace, moving from the outside inwards, popping that jab out, even landing the backhand, not really troubling Makhmudov as such, but Makhmudov, I don't think he's going to be able to get to him with enough regularity. Could end up being horribly wrong here, but I think there's money in the upset, so that's what I'm going to predict. I'm going to predict Guido Vianello to win via decision, probably a split, especially considering that it is in Quebec. Also, another fight to speak about very briefly before we get to the main event, Osleys Iglesias against Sena Egbeko. I think is going to be a very, very interesting fight. For those of you who don't know Iglesias, he's another southpaw Cuban in the super middleweight divisions. Obviously, him and David Morrell were side by side in the division before Morrell decided to move up. But Osleys he's 11-0 with 10 KOs. He hasn't had the same level of trajectory as Morrell. He's probably not as seasoned an amateur or pro. I'm not sure his ceiling is going to be that of a world champion, especially at super middle in the next couple of years. But he is a very fun fighter to watch, and the power is there. The power is legit. I'm thinking, based on sort of the limited amounts of fights I've seen of Egbeko, I think I've seen 2. And obviously one of them was the Morrell fight where I think he was knocked out in the second round. I think he's got good enough fundamentals to maybe make this competitive for like 2 or 3 rounds, but I do think that that Iglesias is going to get to him from sort of the 2nd to 3rd round onwards, and I can see this fight ending inside the first half. It's a 10-rounder, I believe, so I think by the 5th round, latest the 6th round, I can see Egbeko getting stopped again. Iglesias hits hard, and he is fun to watch, so I will be keeping a keen interest in that fight later on. But moving to the main event, you got Christian Mbilli against Sergey Derevyanchenko. Now everyone knows Derevyanchenko is Mr. Hard Night's work, the only person who's ever beaten him comfortably. Now, and when we say comfortable, we're talking, like he actually made it look like he was levels and levels above you, and that was Jamal Charlo. That has to be a case of styles make fights, because you know, he's been in there with much better opposition than Jamal Charlo and has given them fits. Obviously the Triple G fight, he was the first person to visibly hurt Triple G in a fight. The Danny Jacobs fight, obviously, was a really tough fight. Jaime Munguia, I mean, he was winning that fight up until that last round, the knockdown he suffered in the very last round. So yeah, he's a hard night's work for everyone. So Christian Mbilli, he's out here trying to you know, prove his worth. Now the one thing about Mbilli is that he's gonna sit right in front of you, throw punches in bunches, similar to what Munguia tried to do initially, but Derevyanchenko, he's good on the inside. He does have a tendency to maybe get hit and go down in the first couple of rounds, but he always manages to get up and weather that storm. But him being obviously a natural 160 guy and been moving up to sort of 168 in the last few fights, maybe because 160 is just getting a bit too hard to make, the naturally bigger guy here is Mbilli. And while he's not the biggest of punchers, his volume and his accumulation is what's going to get it done in this fight. Derevyanchenko is going to ask him some questions. There's definitely going to be one of his hardest fought fights in terms of heart and grit, but Mbilli has just got too much volume and his stamina is on point. He can throw, you know, hard shots from round 1 all the way to round 12, and not really drop off much in the work rate. And I think that's going to be the issue here. He's going to be at a work rate that Sergey Derevyanchenko just can't match for 12 rounds. I think he's going to be matching it, and matching it well, for that maybe the first 7, first 8, but then from that sort of that 8th, 9th, 10th round onwards is where I can kind of see him starting to wilt and starting to fade, and then ultimately just, you know, have nothing left when the ref just has to sort of jump in and stop it, and it would end up being his first stoppage loss. But I do see Mbilli getting a late stoppage in this, like about rounds 9 or round 10, purely by accumulation, not due to anything else from Derevyanchenko apart from accumulation. But yeah, that's my prediction. I do expect this fight to be a fun fight. I don't know if it's going to be as good as Munguia Derevyanchenko from last year, but if it's even half as good as that, we're in for a treat. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, leave your comments down below. Let me know who you think is going to take it in these fights. And thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe and share as always. But for right now, it's Basis Picks locked.